Now that we know how to customize our brushes, let's learn how to actually make our own brushes. To do this in Photoshop, you can make a brush from anything that has pixels. So to start, I've got a variety of different images that we can work with. And I'm going to tell you some things to think about when you create your brushes. So I've got a picture of a leaf at the top, and let's say I wanted to make kind of a leaf scatter brush from this particular image. The first thing you need to know is that your brushes need to be in black and white and shades of gray. Whatever is darkest will be the highest opacity, so whatever is black, that'll be 100%. Anything less than that, any shade or tint of gray, will be in a percentage of that opacity. So you really want to have good darks and lights. So I'll start off by selecting my image, go up to Image, down to Adjustments, and choose Desaturate. This will take all of the color out of the layer that you have selected. Now I'm left with a black and white picture. To really bring up the dark areas and also bring up the light areas, we'll go back to Image, down to Adjustments, and let's open our Levels adjustment. With our levels, we can control the amount of light and dark by clicking on the little slider arrows to make them lighter or even darker. I can even click the middle one and choose how my darker midtones or lighter midtones are adjusted. Once you get it on the level that you like, you can say OK. And I've got my image now nice black and white. The second thing we need to do is to adjust the size of the image we're working with. Whatever we do, this will be our base size. And right now it's pretty big. It's about 5 inches wide. So I'm going to scale it down to something a little bit more manageable. Of course, later on we can make our brush size bigger or smaller, but this will be the base size that we're working with. In this case, we'll make it roughly 1/2 inch to 1 inch. I can zoom in so I can see what I'm working with. And this will be our basic brush. Now to create the brush. Select the image, and we're going to use our rectangle marquee tool. With this one, if I click and drag over the area, this will select that area of pixels. To define the brush, go to Edit, down to Define Brush Preset. When I click on that, it'll ask me to give me a name, so we'll call it Ben's Leaf. Say OK. Now my brush has been added to my brushes palette. I can click on my brush tool, scroll down to the bottom, and there's Ben's Leaf added to the very, very bottom. You can see it's measuring off the size in pixels, 263. When I click on it, we'll deselect this brush. Let's deselect the area. We'll zoom out, and now you can see with one click, I can quickly and easily add that brush. It's almost like working like a sponge or a stamp. From here, I can open up my brush presets. Here's my presets area, and I can change how this brush will behave. Let's delete what we have on this layer. We'll choose maybe some spacing, space it out a little bit more. Click on Shape Dynamics, and I can do a size jitter, make some bigger or smaller. Let's add some scattering. Scatter it out. Maybe even some rotational scattering. There we are, angle jitter. Some will be angled different ways. Now with one click, I can create a variety of leaves throughout the entire area. If I'm satisfied with how this brush is operating, I can click the Create New Brush icon at the bottom, and now I can make a new brush with it. In this case, instead of Ben's Leaf, we'll call it Ben's Leaf Scatter. Say OK. And that leaf has now been saved to my area. That's working really good with just a picture. The second thing we can do is work with a texture and create a textured type brush, either from some spray splatter patterns or from something dynamic like animal fur. And there's a couple of things to think about with these. If you're going to work with a splatter pattern, be sure it's got good dynamic lights and darks. If you do a Google search for ink splatters or paint splatters, there's a lot of them that's just simply black and white. That may be what you want, but a good dynamic one also has shades of gray. You can make these on your own by just getting a brush and brushing on some ink on a white surface, or taking it and just splattering it over the page and getting some good random patterns created with that ink or that paint. Once you're finished, scan those in, and this is what you're left with. The process of creating these is just as simple as the other one. Since it's already black and white, I'm not going to desaturate it. I'm just going to grab my selection tool, click and drag over the area. Now in this case, rather than making it too square, I can select just the area that I want. Then we'll go to Edit, Define Brush, and we'll say OK to that. Once I deselect it, we'll make a new layer that we'll paint off with, and let's see how this brush tends to work. Select your brush, here's our new one, and you can see it's a pretty big brush. And in one click, there it looks like that. I can scale it down, so now I've got the same brush preset that looks like this. And I do need to add some dynamics to this one. For this one, let's add some rotational type scattering. So I can scatter it out, click on Shape Dynamics, maybe make some more or less round, change up the angle, and now I get a texture that looks a lot like this. Very, very cool. Again, I can also drop the opacity of it and build up the texture several different ways. The final thing you can do when working with texture is to use another texture from an animal or from someone's skin. In this case, I've got a picture of a cat. Now with this one, there's something to think about. I'm going to zoom in. Again, we'll close this out. We'll make this one desaturated by going to Adjustments, choose Desaturate, got my black and white picture, and I can choose different areas of this cat. You can see I've got some light fur, I've got some dark fur, and I've got a little bit of everything in between, so this is going to work out great. If I choose my selection tool, I can click and drag over it. And with this, if I define the brush now, we'll just say OK to that and start using it. This is what my brush will look like. Let's choose it. It's going to have a very square edge. Now that's okay if that's what I want, but what I really want to do is to be able to blend this together. I want to give it a soft edge, and it's going to be very difficult to do that if I've got just my regular marquee selection. So rather than using that, let's back up. I'm going to make another selection with my rectangle marquee. This time we're going to add some feathering to the edge of my selection. Depending on the size of the picture you're working on, you may need more or less, but I'm going to try 25 pixels. Remember, when we feather the edge of the selection, the edges will be nice and soft. So I'm going to select the same area. You can even see my selected area is starting to round over. That's the feathering taking effect. This time, when I go to Edit, Define the Brush, this new brush that I have will have a nice soft feathered edge to it as well. Here's our final one. Now when I click and drag, now I can easily and quickly blend those in together from that. So whenever you use a pattern brush, be sure to feather your edges of those defined brushes. In addition to this, I can now open up my brush presets, change up some shape and scattering dynamics, and I've got a great customized brush ready to use for any type of painting situation.